Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a sun-drenched, sheep-scented slice of ancient myth that you probably weren't expecting. Picture it. Soft hills, lazy clouds, and a god with the world's most impractical resume being sentenced to rural punishment. That's right, you're about to follow Apollo, the radiant, silver-voiced Greek god of music, prophecy, and not knowing how to hold a shovel, as he is forcibly reassigned to cattle duty. The punishment is divine, the cows are deeply unimpressed, and you're tagging along for every odd, slow, and sleepy step of it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge beside Apollo, who is not for the first time pouting. His golden hair catches every glint of sunlight, and his sandals are far too clean for this part of Thessaly. As always, he looks like someone carved from vanity and harp music, and you look like someone who had to get up at dawn to help a disgraced god navigate sheep droppings. Zeus has had enough. Apollo, in all his bright-limbed glory, has crossed some divine line again, possibly by hurling another one of his sacred arrows at someone who questioned his singing. Or maybe it was that time he tried to start a music school on Mount Olympus that ended in flames and minor smiting. Historians still argue whether it was truly Apollo's hubris or just bad luck with lyre acoustics in the marble halls. In any case, Zeus has sentenced him to do time, so to speak, not in Tartarus, no, nothing that dramatic. Just good old-fashioned mortal labor. Specifically, herding cows for a human king, which is for Apollo the equivalent of being told to wash dishes for eternity. He's still glowing faintly with divine irritation. You arrive with him at the edge of King Admetus's pasturelands. There are cows grazing languidly, the occasional fly buzzing like a lazy tambourine, and a farmhand asleep under a fig tree. So quiet that even your breathing feels rude. Apollo mutters, "They smell." You look at him. They're cows. "They didn't tell me they'd smell." He's aghast. This is going to be a long few years. You follow him up the dusty trail to a modest stable where a man in a sun-bleached cloak is arguing with a mule. This is Admetus, who is currently unaware that he's about to hire a god to oversee his livestock. He turns as you approach, squinting at the golden stranger beside you. "Do you herd?" Admetus asks without much hope. Apollo straightens up, brushes imaginary dirt from his tunic, and nods solemnly. "Absolutely," he lies. You do your best not to laugh. To his credit, Admetus doesn't ask questions. Maybe it's the faint glow Apollo gives off in the shade, or maybe the guy just really needs help. Either way, the god of archery and plague is hired on the spot. And so begins Apollo's time as the world's most overqualified cowherd. At first, he tries to bring Olympian flair to the job. He whistles to the cows, expecting them to line up in a harmonious A major. They respond by chewing slowly and ignoring him. He gestures grandly toward the watering trough, only to trip and fall in it himself. There is an awkward moment where he tries to compose a working song to encourage the animals, something between a hymn and a lullaby. It only works on himself. You have to wake him up when he nods off in the haystack mid-verse. Apollo sulks. "Why do they not obey me? They're cows." You remind him gently. "They don't even obey gravity sometimes." Still, he persists. He tries memorizing each one's name. He braids their tails into complex knots that he insists are divine sigils for good luck. He starts carving tiny lyres out of fence posts when he's bored. He carves a particularly elegant one for a calf named Polyphonia. Meanwhile, the cows are perfectly content. One even nudges Apollo affectionately. He recoils. "She licked me." "Congratulations," you say. "You've been accepted." And yet, behind Apollo's dramatic sighs and eye rolls, something begins to shift. He's still awful at milking, but he talks to the cows now. He asks one named Hesper for advice on rhythm. He confides in another, Callus, about his suspicions that Zeus only punishes him because he's too talented. You don't say it aloud, but you're starting to suspect the cows might actually like him. Still, you can't help but wonder, how long can a god really fake being mortal before something divine slips out again? And indeed, that moment is coming, and it will involve singing cattle, a suspiciously lush field, and a cow that may or may not leave actual gold wherever it walks. But for now, Apollo sits beside you in the pasture, hair glowing like it forgot how to be subtle, a lyre in his lap, and a cow gently chewing on his sandal strap. You close your eyes, leaning back against the sun-warmed fence. Somewhere in the distance, a sleepy breeze shifts the hay and a bird calls lazily overhead. The cows shift content. Apollo hums something quiet and haunting, and for once he doesn't sound proud, just peaceful. You decide not to tell him there's a cow stuck in the olive grove again. That's tomorrow's problem. The morning begins as it often does in Thessaly, with dew on the grass, a hint of goat in the air, and Apollo trying to coax a cow off the roof of a chicken coop. You're not sure how it got up there. Neither is Apollo. The cow isn't helping. The first official day of his divine punishment is already off to a promising start. Despite his celestial glow and track record of slaying serpents, Apollo isn't exactly blending in with the other herdsmen. For one thing, he keeps trying to herd the cattle with a golden staff that doubles as an instrument. For another, his idea of protective footwear involves sandals stitched with sapphires. He's radiant, slightly singed from yesterday's sunburn, and visibly struggling with what mortals call mud. You squint at his perfectly white tunic, now polka-dotted with hoof prints. You sure you've done this before? Apollo glares at you, then at the cow. Of course. I once cared for Helios's sun chariot goats. Those weren't goats. And you set one on fire. Semantics. He wipes his hands on what might once have been an embroidered sash from Delos and Sighs. No one told me cowherding involved so many cows. The cows, meanwhile, seem entirely unbothered by their glamorous new guardian. One of them, Hermia, has taken a liking to Apollo and follows him around like an oversized dog, mooing plaintively every time he disappears behind a tree. Apollo is unimpressed. Why does she look at me like that? Like what? Like she expects poetry. She's a cow. She probably expects hay. Apollo sits down on a boulder and surveys the field. The hills roll out like sleeping giants in the distance, and a soft wind stirs the grass in gentle ripples. You have to admit, it's not a bad place for exile. But there's a problem. A god, especially one prone to dramatics, can't just do a job. He has to transform it. So Apollo tries to beautify herding. He arranges the cows in spirals. He composes short odes to each of them. He insists on naming all the bulls after musical modes: Dorian, Phrygian, Mixolydian. You watch as he stands on a hilltop, arms raised, trying to get the herd to respond to a choral call and response. They do respond by stampeding in the opposite direction. One of them knocks over a grain silo. Another eats part of a laundry line. Apollo, dazed, dusts himself off. Progress. The townsfolk start to notice the strange new herder. Rumors spread that he glows under moonlight, that the cows now sleep in neat rows, that butter production has mysteriously doubled. A few claim that when Apollo sings, the milk curdles just right for the softest cheese in Thessaly. Historians still argue whether this was divine intervention or just a very enthusiastic dairymaid who figured out timing. Meanwhile, Admetus, the king who hired him, finally returns from a hunting trip and gets his first look at Apollo in action. He stares as Apollo performs a complex roundelay involving 3 flutes, 1 harp, and a confused goose. The cows are entranced. So are the shepherds. Admetus folds his arms. Are you trying to enchant my cows? Apollo beams. It's working. The king blinks slowly. Just don't make them float. That afternoon, Apollo tries something more traditional. You watch as he uses sunlight to dry out the hay more quickly. He gets the angle just right, and within minutes, the entire barn smells like warm grass and light. Unfortunately, he forgets that hay is flammable. The barn has to be rebuilt. You both spend the evening apologizing to the carpenter and chasing a goat with a half-burnt tail. But slowly, surprisingly, Apollo begins to adapt. You catch him, one evening, resting under the stars with Hermia, humming to her as she snoozes beside him. There's no lyre in his hands, just stillness, and the occasional blink as fireflies float past. I think I'm getting better, he murmurs. At cowherding? At being boring. You chuckle. It suits you. He throws a twig at you. There's a rhythm forming now. Morning feedings. Noon milking. Evening songs. Apollo starts braiding garlands from metaflowers, 1 for each cow. You find a particularly fancy one on Hermia with delicate white blossoms tucked behind her ear. Some of the other herdsmen are less sure what to make of it. One insists the cows are too calm now. Another complains that their dreams have become weirdly poetic. But you? You're starting to like this new pace. The days grow long and golden. Apollo hums to himself as he counts the cattle. His sandals are no longer spotless, and his tunic now has a patch sewn on by a shepherd's wife who doesn't know she's mending godly couture. Then, one morning, something shifts. You notice it first when you follow Apollo to the far field where a cow is grazing at the edge of the woods. The grass under her hooves seems shinier. She moves and there's a flash. You squint. Another hoofprint. Another glint. Did you see that? you ask. Apollo frowns. See what? The ground. It's weight. Look, the cow steps again. Where her hoof touched the earth, there's a faint shimmer. You kneel. It's not just sunlight. It's metal. Soft. Yellow. You brush the dirt aside. Gold. Why, you whisper, is that cow leaving gold? Apollo tilts his head. I may have sung to her too much, and just like that, the world is about to get a whole lot more complicated. But that's for tomorrow. Tonight, the stars are out, the cows are calm, and Apollo has fallen asleep with Hermia curled beside him like a divine pillow. The only sound is the soft rustle of wind in the barley and the faint tinkle of his lyre strings swaying gently on the fence post. You smile, stretch out on the grass, and feel sleep drift closer. You wake up to the sound of coins, not jingling exactly, more like a soft clinking, like someone shaking a pouch very politely in the distance. Except there's no one around. Just you, a very shiny cow, and Apollo, who is currently arguing with a butterfly. She was circling me, he insists. That clearly means something. You nod, not because you agree, but because you're still thinking about last night's golden footprints. And sure enough, when Hermia the cow saunters past, her hooves press into the earth with a muffled ching, and there it is again, a soft glint in the morning light. Gold. Real gold. Apollo walks over, frowning at the shimmering soil. She's doing that again? Yup. Didn't touch Midas, did she? Nope. He crouches beside the hoofprint and pokes it. A coin, round, perfectly smooth, and unmistakably stamped with a stylized image of a lyre, pops up like it's been freshly minted by the earth itself. You both stare at it. She's laying drachmas, Apollo says blankly. I've enchanted the cow into laying money. Hermia, oblivious, tries to eat your sandal. There are many things a sensible person might do in this situation. Notify the king, summon a priest, consult the oracle of Delphi. Apollo, naturally, chooses option D, shrug, pick up the coin, and toss it into a nearby jar like he's been doing this all his life. You tilt your head. So, do all the cows do this now? No, he says, just her. And maybe that one. And, oh dear, you follow his gaze. The entire herd is shimmering. Subtle, just a flicker here, a glint there, but unmistakable. One by one, each cow is casually planting small patches of treasure with every sleepy step. The fields have become a divine piggy bank. You take a deep breath and say what you're both thinking. We should definitely not tell anyone. Apollo nods so fast you're surprised his laurel wreath doesn't fall off. But keeping secrets in a village of nosy shepherds is like trying to hide a thunderstorm behind a curtain. Word gets out. It starts innocently enough. A little boy notices a golden pebble in a hoof trail. A milkmaid's bucket grows mysteriously heavy. Then a merchant stumbles upon an entire glittering footprint and starts weeping with joy. Within days, the valley is buzzing with rumors. Aphrodite bathed in the stream. No, it's dragon treasure. Maybe the cows ate Midas. A delegation arrives from the next town over requesting a viewing of the miraculous livestock. Apollo throws a cloak over Hermia's back and claims she's just exceptionally clean. It doesn't work. The visitors leave in a state of mild religious awe, and one of them definitely stole a hoofprint. Meanwhile, the local economy is beginning to shift. Bakery prices triple. Cobbler wages mysteriously quintuple. One shepherd starts charging for blessed hay. Another offers hoofprint tours. And someone, possibly Apollo, starts selling cow-themed talismans made out of tree bark and optimism. Historians still argue whether this was Thessaly's first inflation crisis or a divine prank taken too far. You and Apollo huddle near the stream, whispering about what to do. We could leave, you suggest, and let these people worship my cow as an oracle? I mean, they are bringing her baskets of figs. Hermia, chewing serenely, accepts a flower crown from a passing child. She's loving this. Apollo sighs. I didn't mean to turn her into a golden goose. Cow, whatever. Point is, this was supposed to be simple exile. It's true. You were meant to keep a low profile. Instead, there's now a gold-huffing herd, a minor cult forming, and oh yes, a group of very confused tax officials approaching with a clipboard and a scroll longer than your arm. The lead official adjusts his spectacles. We need to inspect your livestock. Apollo throws a blanket over Hermia's back and gestures dramatically. She's sleeping. She's mooing. In her sleep, you cough and step in. Maybe you'd like some cheese? It works momentarily. But the writing's on the wall. Or rather, in the dirt. Written in glimmering cow prints and occasionally chewed by curious goats. That night, under the olive tree, you and Apollo come to a decision. Tomorrow, he says, we put the herd on a mountain. You blink. You want to move all the cows to the mountain? They need peace. They need containment. Same thing. So, the next morning, you both wake up at dawn. Whisper to the cows like it's a secret mission. and start herding them toward the misty slopes of Mount Othrys. It's not easy. One cow, Lyrica, refuses to walk uphill without a musical accompaniment. Another panics at the sight of a butterfly. Hermia simply lies down halfway up and demands cuddles. But you make it, eventually, and once the cows settle in, something strange happens. The gold stops. No more glittering hoofprints. No more accidental minting. It's as if the mountain, colder and quieter than the valley below, has absorbed the enchantment. Apollo pokes the ground beside Hermia's hoof. Nothing, he says, sounding equal parts relieved and disappointed. You exhale. Maybe it was just a phase, like lyre solos during dinner, or dating mortals. Apollo rolls his eyes. I only did that twice. Which time caused the plague? Moving on. You both watch as the cows graze peacefully in the silver morning light. The only thing shimmering now is the dew on their backs and the occasional overpolished stone. No more chaos. No more coins. Just peace. And for once, you almost believe it might last. Peace, of course, is a relative term. Because just as you start to relax, feet up, sipping herbal goat's milk tea brewed in a cracked amphora, you hear the unmistakable sound of poetry. Bad poetry. Drifting up from the valley below comes a voice trying very hard to rhyme moonlight with cheese blight and failing spectacularly. You glance at Apollo, who's pretending not to notice. Don't say it, he mutters, eyes fixed on a distant sheep. You say it anyway. Is that another bard? Apollo groans. It's worse. That's Hyacinthus. You blink. The one from Sparta? He nods grimly. Yes. Spartan prince. Pretty. Fond of limericks. Once tried to invent interpretive pottery. Oh dear. And sure enough, climbing the mountain trail with the dramatic flair of someone who has never once carried a water jug in his life comes Hyacinthus, cloaked, perfumed, and radiating smug romantic ambition. He spots Apollo immediately and beams. There you are. I've been wandering for days, writing odes in your honor. Listen to this one. No, Apollo says, gently but firmly, but it's too late. Hyacinthus launches into verse involving divine utters and something uncomfortably metaphoric about streams of gold. The cows look deeply offended. You trying not to inhale your tea, cough. Why is he here? Apollo mutters under his breath. I might have told him I was being exiled to a lonely place full of longing. Apparently he translated that as romantic mountain date with cows. The thing about Hyacinthus is that he doesn't take hints, or warnings, or direct requests to please stop reciting things about lactation. Instead, he sets up camp right beside yours, spreads out scented cushions, and begins what he calls a sonnet vigil. You ask Apollo, do you want me to push him down the hill? Tempting. But no. He bruises easily, so you try to ignore it. But things get complicated when Hyacinthus begins giving the cows names. Oh look, he sighs dreamily. This one's clearly a Sappho. She has the eyes of a tragic poet. That's Hermia, you correct. Sappho Hermia, he decides. A fusion of elegance. He gifts her a garland of woven violets. She sneezes on him. Later, over fire-roasted figs and toasted barley cakes, you and Apollo plot your next move. We have to redirect him, you say? Apollo, staring gloomily into the fire, nods. Maybe I pretend to fall in love with a tree, or a bear, or you. You raise an eyebrow. We're not doing that again. Fair enough. So you try Plan B, distraction via festival. It's a classic trick, beloved by bored Olympians and desperate mortals alike. Just invent a local celebration and hope everyone gets too caught up in ribbon dancing to ask questions. You and Apollo spend the next 2 days carving rustic instruments, stringing olive branches into crowns, and encouraging the cows to practice synchronized mooing. Hyacinthus, predictably, loves it. This is divine, he cries, spinning in a tunic that is somehow both sheer and embroidered with cows. You call it the Festival of Hoof and Harmony. Locals wander up from the valley, drawn by rumors of divine music and possible cheese giveaways. There's lyre music, goat races, and a surprisingly competitive event called Guess That Cowprint. Apollo plays a solo. You fry honey cakes. Hermia wins best moo. Historians still argue whether this event qualifies as the first bovine-themed cult gathering in ancient Greece. Some claim it's apocryphal. Others insist they've found shards of pottery featuring distinctly cow-shaped deities wearing laurels. Either way, it works, for a while, because when the sun sets and the fire dies down, Hyacinthus sits too close to Apollo and whispers, I wish we could stay here forever. Apollo shifts uncomfortably. Forever's a very long time. And that's when you see it, the look. It's a mix of heartache and poetry and entirely too much scented oil. It means Hyacinthus is about to compose something devastating. You brace yourself. Sure enough, at dawn, he announces a grand gesture. He will build a shrine. To the cows, to Apollo, to love itself. And it will be shaped like a lyre. You close your eyes. We need a better plan. Apollo agrees. We need work. Like manual labor? Exactly. Something so exhausting no one will have energy for sonnets. So you descend the mountain the next day in search of a task humble enough for a god, yet tedious enough to repel poetic suitors. And that's how you find yourselves volunteering to rebuild the local granary. Hyacinthus, too confused by the smell of wet barley, stays behind. You spend the next few weeks stacking grain sacks, hammering thatch, and occasionally arguing with mice. Apollo, surprisingly handy with a mallet, gains a bit of respect among the townsfolk. One even calls him that quiet guy with the nice arms. You nearly drop a barrel laughing. And just like that, things settle again. No gold cows. No cults. No love-struck princes weaving cow haikus. Just you, Apollo, and a granary slowly rising from the dust. Until, of course, the snakes show up. But that's for tomorrow. It starts with a hiss. A long, slow, sibilant sigh that slithers through the morning stillness like a particularly judgmental breeze. You blink awake under your half-stitched granary tarp and wonder if someone's boiling tea again, only to realize the sound is much closer to the ground, and also moving. You sit up slowly, carefully, and see it, a snake, pale green and long as your arm, coiled neatly atop the bag of barley you stacked just yesterday. It flicks its tongue at you like it's evaluating your worth as breakfast. You freeze. Apollo doesn't. He's behind you in seconds, holding a garden hoe like a lyre of destruction. No sudden movements, he murmurs, eyes locked on the snake. Wasn't planning on it. Then more hissing. Multiple hisses. You both turn in unison to see a second serpent slithering under the grain sacks, then a third descending from the roof beam, and a fourth perched rather smugly atop the granary's half-finished arch like it owns the place. You stare. Are we being judged by a snake committee? Apollo nods grimly. Looks like a divine infestation. Could be local snakes. He snorts. Those are temple vipers. They only show up when oracles go weird. You pause. Define go weird. Apollo sighs. Dreams. Prophecies. Sometimes unnatural yogurt curdling. Sure enough, the village elder stumbles toward you, wrapped in 3 shawls and confusion. I had a dream last night, she says. A cow whispered numbers to me. Apollo pinches the bridge of his nose. Oh no. Then I sneezed up a gold coin, she adds helpfully. You look at Apollo. We didn't bless the grain, did we? Not on purpose. He explains that sometimes divine energy leaks, especially if, say, one has been radiating solar blessings near open produce. It seeps into the barley, the water, the butter, and apparently the rodents. The mice, now unusually plump and oddly musical, begin chirping in pentatonic scales. One of them hits a perfect E-flat. Okay, you say. Now it's weird. Historians still debate whether this event marks the origin of the so-called Oracle of Grain and Fur, a briefly celebrated rural prophecy cult in which elderly women translated the chirps of fat mice into weather predictions. The records are sketchy, but one scroll insists that a mouse named Leonidas correctly predicted a thunderstorm and 2 pregnancies. Either way, the snakes aren't leaving. They're guardians now, Apollo says flatly. Of what? He gestures. The granary. Sure enough, the serpents now bask in the sun atop the grain sacks like smug librarians. They bite no one, but they stare, long, slow, soul-piercing stares that make the local children cry and the donkeys faint. We need to appease them, you suggest. With what? Scented incense and interpretive dance. You shrug. Mice? He actually considers it. So you devise a plan, make the granary an official temple, but the kind of temple no one wants to visit. You hang a sign, Shrine of Agricultural Mystery. Donations accepted. No refunds. Apollo composes a deeply confusing hymn about wheat spirits. You choreograph a ritual that involves waving rakes in a circle while chanting yeast, yeast, rise in peace. Hyacinthus returns halfway through a rehearsal and, to his credit, only blinks twice before helping arrange votive loaves. I see your aesthetic has evolved, he says. It's rustic, Apollo replies, and reptilian. It works. Sort of. People bring offerings. Chickpeas. Flower garlands. A suspicious number of potatoes. Some believe the snakes offer fertility, others think they're cursed tax collectors. No one is quite sure, and Apollo refuses to clarify. Meanwhile, the snakes continue lounging. One of them adopts a barrel as a throne. Another develops an affinity for Apollo's sandals and curls around his ankle like a bracelet. You name it Socrates, things settle again. Sort of, except for the dreams. Apollo starts waking in the night, mumbling about floods and flaming chariots. You start having visions of cows tap dancing on mountaintops. The elder reports a vision of Hyacinthus winning a wrestling match against a loaf of bread. Do you think it means anything? You ask Apollo one morning. He looks haunted. I think I miss being bad at herding, but the weirdness keeps building. The snakes now glow faintly under moonlight. The granary hums. The barley tastes like figs. Travelers stop by asking for visions. One even claims the wheat cured his hiccups. You and Apollo hold an emergency council at dawn, surrounded by cows, mice, and at least 3 snakes doing synchronized stretches. I think the cows are divine again, you say. I think I'm divine again, Apollo admits. You both look at Hermia, who is chewing contentedly on a scroll someone left as an offering. We should probably leave, you say. Apollo nods. Before the mice demand vestments. So once again, you pack, but not with urgency. This time it's a gentle farewell. The cows are healthy. The snakes seem content. The mice chirp a lullaby as you roll your things into sacks. Hyacinthus waves goodbye from a hammock made of wheat stalks. Apollo leaves a single gold flake behind, tucked beneath Socrates' tail. And with that you head north, away from temples, visions, and the lingering smell of divine cheese. You walk, and walk, and walk. The dust changes color every few miles from red to gold to something distressingly like eggplant, and the cows don't complain, which is perhaps the most miraculous sign of all. Apollo seems lighter now. Not cheerful exactly, but less tightly coiled. His hair still glows faintly when he sneezes, but he hasn't accidentally set anything on fire in days. That's progress. You think we'll find normal work this time? You ask one afternoon, as you both chew on figs and gaze at a distant village shimmering on the horizon. Define normal, he replies, mouthful. No visions. No mice choirs. No snakes with opinions. He swallows. Unlikely. But one can dream. The village, it turns out, is known for 2 things, olives and bureaucracy. The olives are excellent. The bureaucracy is less edible. Still, you're hopeful. A new start. A chance to reinvent yourselves as simple workers, no glowing halos, no celestial cattle. Maybe Apollo could take up sculpture? But fate, as always, has other plans. You are barely 3 days into your stay when you hear about it. The lost flock. Not cows this time. Not even goats. Sheep, dozens of them. Gone. Vanished like socks from a dryer. The village elder, who looks like he's been made entirely out of parchment and passive aggression, explains the situation. The shepherd took a nap under a fig tree and awoke to find the hillside empty. Classic fig tree trap, Apollo mutters. You are both promptly hired as temporary divine shepherd recovery consultants. It sounds fancy. It mostly means wandering around whistling and yelling names like Flufficus and William, but you get lucky. After half a day of tracking oddly rhythmic hoofprints, you stumble across the sheep. They're fine. A little dusty. Standing in a neat circle in the middle of a grove, swaying gently from side to side like they're at a silent disco. Apollo squints. They're meditating. You raise an eyebrow. That's not a thing sheep do. He nods, serious. Not usually. Unless someone's been singing near them. Sure enough, a flute lies on the grass nearby. And perched on a rock beside it, Hermes, wearing sunglasses and eating grapes. Miss me? He grins. You groan. You again. Apollo sighs. You taught the sheep to vibe? Hermes shrugs. They needed purpose. It's hard to argue with that. The sheep do seem weirdly peaceful. Even the lambs are sitting in lotus position, which is physically improbable. Hermes explains that he's been experimenting with pastoral transcendence. Says it might be the future of agriculture. Also says the sheep have stopped chewing holes in the village laundry since he started curating their energy. Apollo tries very hard not to strangle him with a grapevine. Meanwhile, the village, seeing its sheep blissfully still and no longer escaping fences, decides this is excellent news. You and Apollo are immediately promoted to full-time sheep caretakers. Again, you are officially back to herding. Except now, your job description includes spiritual guidance and occasional pan-flute therapy. Historians still argue whether this short-lived meditative flock movement had any real influence on Greek agricultural practice. One tablet claims it reduced wool shedding. Another simply says, do not feed the sheep figs after sunset. Things start off easy. The sheep are chill. You guide them to new pastures. Apollo hums lullabies. Occasionally, Hermes pops in to teach the sheep deep breathing exercises. You begin to relax. That is your first mistake, because then the olive oil incident happens. It begins innocently. One of the sheep bumps into a low-hanging jar outside a market stall. It topples. Cracks. Oil everywhere. A second sheep slips. A third tries to lick the spill. Soon, the entire flock is sliding around like woolly figure skaters. You try to control the chaos, but Apollo's laughing too hard to help. One particularly nimble ewe somehow launches herself into a barrel and emerges looking like a greasy throw pillow. The villagers are not pleased, especially when someone points out that the sheep, now soaked in high-grade olive oil, are technically more valuable than before. Artisanal Hermes offers helpfully. Organic sheep all cured. You are fined 3 amphorae. The sheep become local celebrities. People come from nearby towns to see the olive slick mystics of the grove. Someone starts charging for portraits. A man in a toga tries to sell you a sponsorship deal for an herbal shampoo. You do not have the strength to say no. Apollo, for his part, seems amused. At least we haven't cursed anything. You both pause, then turn slowly to see a group of children offering fig tarts to one particularly oily ram who glows faintly in the setting sun. Never mind, Apollo mutters. It's happening again. The sheep begin humming. Not just bleating, not by and G, but actual harmonic humming. You try not to panic. This isn't like the mice thing, right? Hermes whistles. The sheep harmonize in C major. You panic a little. The elder is called. He performs a ritual of clarification, which involves poking the sheep with a fennel stick and declaring them aggressively enigmatic. By week's end, a new oracle is erected. The Temple of Oleopastoral Enlightenment. You hand in your resignation, which consists of a napkin that says, "No more glowing animals, please." Apollo signs it with a doodle of a sheep in sunglasses. Once again, you pack. Once again, the cows, who have followed you for some reason, moo their judgment. And once again, you trudge off into the uncertain distance, hoping naively that this time, things will be different. It's barely dawn when you and Apollo reach the edge of another nameless hill town, small, sun-warmed, and suspiciously quiet, as though the birds are on strike and the cicadas have unionized. You pause to sniff the air. Is that vinegar? Apollo sniffs too. Pickles. You look at him. He shrugs. A lot of experience with mortal snacks. It's a long story involving Dionysus and fermented cucumbers. You decide not to press. As you step into the town square, a hand-painted sign greets you in wobbly letters, home of the legendary pickle of prophecy. You stop. Apollo stares. A cow coughs in disbelief behind you. The only open stall belongs to an old woman stirring a barrel of brine with a ladle roughly the size of a trident. Her hair is white, her eyes sharper than obsidian, and her voice is a perfect blend of grandma and low-key threat. You look like 2 weary souls in need of purpose, she croons. I'm actually more in need of a nap, you mumble. Do you take interns? Apollo asks. Within the hour, you are hired as assistant briners. The job involves cutting cucumbers, chanting under your breath, and not asking why the barrels occasionally whisper back. Apollo seems weirdly at peace here. He hums while slicing dill. He even makes friends with a particularly sarcastic cat named Speckle. You, meanwhile, try to avoid the barrel labeled "Do not feed after midnight." You begin to think you've finally found peace. But this, naturally, is where things begin to ferment, literally and metaphorically. Because the townspeople truly believe that one pickle, just one, and they never say which, grants brief visions of the future to anyone who eats it. And they are absolutely obsessed with figuring out which one. Every evening, there's a pickle revelation ceremony. People take turns sampling pickles and dramatically declaring things like, "I shall meet a goat in the next full moon. Beware the man with 7 sandals. The gods want me to open a honey candle boutique." Apollo watches from the sidelines with the tired air of someone who's seen real prophecies and just wants to be left alone with his cucumber slices. But one night, inevitably, someone makes a declaration that hits a little too close. A young woman bites into her pickle, eyes go wide, and she says clearly, "The sun shall lose his way again." Everyone freezes. Slowly, the crowd turns toward Apollo. He groans. Not this again. The whispers start. Rumors spread. A divine figure, fallen from power, now slicing pickles with mortals. The sun himself demoted to deli work. The townspeople grow weird. Not hostile, just worshipful. They begin offering jars of artisan brine at his feet. A child draws his face on a cucumber and names it Minialo. You think about running, but then things take a turn for the utterly bizarre. Because the pickles actually start working. Not every time, but now and then, someone takes a bite and gets something right. A woman dreams of rain, there's a sudden downpour. A boy says, "The cat will lead me to treasure," and the next morning, Speckle deposits a shiny button in his bed. Someone eats a whole pickle and begins speaking fluent Phoenician. Apollo is rattled. "That's not possible. That's my department." You nod. Could be just coincidence. Coincidence doesn't taste like garlic and coriander. Hermes arrives the next day holding a sandwich. Your pickles are hauntingly complex, he says through a full mouth. Also, I may have spiked the brine. You stare. With what? He counts on his fingers. Ambrosia. A single tear from a muse. 3 drops of chaos water. And a sprig of mint for freshness. You put your face in your hands. Apollo squints. You made psychoprophetic pickles. Hermes beams. I call them provision pickles. You decide, firmly and without hesitation, that you want to go home. But there's no going back. Not yet, because that night the villagers hold a full-on festival. There are banners. Speeches. Someone composes a hymn. A man dressed as a giant pickle dances on stilts. The temple of the tangy oracle is unveiled, complete with jars set into the walls and a sacred ladle on display. Apollo sighs deeply. Do you ever get the feeling the world is not improving? You nod, passing him a cup of cold brine. Daily, historians still argue whether this was a one-off mass delusion or a genuine brush with divine fermentation. The only surviving record is a mural showing a man in glowing robes being serenaded by a choir of cucumbers. But for you, the final straw is what they ask next. They want you and Apollo to bless the pickles. In public, while wearing ceremonial aprons, Apollo draws the line. I am the god of light, music, and clarity, not relish. Hermes starts designing apron logos anyway. You pack again. This time, you leave a thank you note and a bottle of vinegar behind. Speckle gives you one last judging stare before curling up on a warm jar. As you trudge back into the hills, Apollo mutters, I never want to smell brine again. You nod. We need something simple next. No magic. No glowing food. No prophetic vegetables. The cows follow you in silence. Behind you somewhere, the pickle choir begins its nightly chant. You're not even halfway to wherever you're going when you spot it. A ribbon of dust curling up from the next valley, followed by the unmistakable creak of wooden wheels and the off-key honking of a horn made from, is that a ram's horn? Apollo squints. That's either a wedding parade or a traveling philosopher. Either way, we're doomed. It's neither. It's a mobile theater troupe. You know this because the wagon is covered in peeling paint that reads, The Thespian Tortoise Presents, The Ballad of the Bronze Beard. A small man with a feathered hat leaps out and bows. You there. You look vaguely unemployed. Can you act? Apollo, eyes wide, immediately denies any association with the dramatic arts. Absolutely not. I prefer static beauty. The troupe, however, is desperate. You are, within the hour, both hired. Apollo as a sun-charming chorus extra and you somehow as the backup tortoise wrangler. There is no main tortoise wrangler. It's a trap. Still, the gig pays in bread, olives, and the occasional coin. And for the first few days, it's almost fun. You travel from village to village. The lead actor insists on being addressed as Master Posy Dramas. The play changes nightly depending on audience feedback and whether the goat has eaten the scrolls again. The script, if you can call it that, is a fever dream of history and myth. Scene 1. A Spartan blacksmith sings a love ballad to a bronze statue. Scene 2. Zeus shows up disguised as a sock. Scene 3. A tortoise delivers a monologue on the futility of sandals. And yet audiences love it. People throw flowers. Children beg for autographs. A priest declares the tortoise the chosen one. Even Apollo starts to enjoy it. He hums his own dramatic themes. He suggests better lighting. He creates a sunbeam spotlight for the lead actor's big moment. But of course, nothing golden stays. Because one evening, just before the performance in a very important town, Master Posy Dramas sprains his ankle doing emotional lunges, and the show must go on. So naturally, they cast Apollo as the lead. Now, if you've ever seen a god forced into amateur community theater, you know it's both dazzling and deeply cursed. Apollo has presence. He's luminous. He remembers every line after reading it once. He also cannot stop making improvements. Why would the blacksmith weep here? He asks. Wouldn't he recite a radiant sonnet about fire and longing? You try to stop him, but it's too late. He rewrites half the third act. That night, the audience is stunned. They are not used to iambic hexameter, holographic lighting, or impromptu harp solos. A few cry. One faints. 2 declare religious conversions. Apollo takes a bow and declares it a humble experiment in mortal catharsis. Backstage, the rest of the troupe mutinies. You stole the spotlight, cries one actor. I was supposed to have a line. The tortoise bites him. Apollo shrugs. Art evolves. You are voted most neutral party and asked to mediate. It does not go well. The troupe fractures. Half want to follow Apollo and form a divine drama collective. The others want to return to their roots, simple, tortoise-based storytelling. In the confusion, you and Apollo slip away, but not before the tortoise, newly rebranded as the Oracle of Shellos, is carried off by a crowd of enthusiastic followers. You whisper, "We really can't go anywhere without causing at least one minor cult." Apollo just looks smug. "Well, I am inspiration incarnate." You consider throwing a sandal at him. Historians still debate whether this brief surge in traveling shell theater was divine influence or just peak Bronze Age whimsy. Some argue that the emergence of amphitheater design across certain villages owes more to this moment than to classical Greek architecture. Others just point to the tortoise's shrine, yes, it's real, and shrug. You, however, remember the chaos. The hastily built stage collapsing under too much divine radiance. The actor trying to improvise dialogue with a cow, and the moment Apollo, standing in the rain, softly said, "Maybe I should just open a vineyard." Now you walk the next dusty trail in silence, wondering what the gods did for peace before tea was invented. A soft breeze stirs the olive branches. Apollo walks beside you, uncharacteristically quiet. You wait. Finally, he says, "Next time, you're playing the blacksmith." The thing about traveling with a former sun god is that the bar for ordinary gets permanently raised. So when you wander into a valley littered with glinting, half-buried metal objects and Apollo casually murmurs, "Ah yes, this must be where Hephaestus dumped his prototypes," you don't even blink. You just sigh and start checking for scorpions. The landscape is half junkyard, half museum exhibit. Bent bronze limbs, shattered gear systems, a disemboweled lion automaton twitching every few minutes as if trying to remember how to roar. Apollo pokes it with a stick, still more expressive than Aeschylus. This place isn't marked on any map, which is saying something because even your most questionable scroll, the one illustrated entirely with fish, makes no mention of a mechanical scrapyard nestled between two sleepy goat villages. Still, you and Apollo settle in for the night. You roast some barley cakes over a gear-shaped fire pit and watch the stars. For a moment, things feel calm. Then, at precisely the worst possible hour, the owl wakes up. To clarify, not a real owl. A bronze owl, fully life-sized, eyes glowing like embers, flaps out of a tree with a screech that sounds like a trumpet learning to cry. Apollo frowns. Bubo Model 3.0? Not his finest work. The owl lands with a thud beside your fire, shakes off a few cobwebs, and starts reciting what sounds like a user manual. In case of divine emergency, it says, "Please activate auxiliary protocol. Cow Protocol Beta 9. You and Apollo exchange a look. "We're not touching anything labeled Beta 9, you say. Apollo nods. Learned that the hard way on Delos. But the owl is persistent. It waddles up, fixes you with its glowing eyes, and chirps, "Urgent. Bovine reallocation sequence incomplete. Please locate herd." And that's when it clicks. This isn't a junkyard, it's the lost automation lab where Apollo tried to build the first self-herding cowbots. The project, according to some fragmentary temple graffiti, failed due to excessive mowing. Historians still argue whether this lab was a myth or a misunderstood weather station. You, standing ankle-deep in what might be a self-basting cauldron, have strong opinions. Apollo grimaces. "I was trying to automate agriculture. Mortals were getting distracted. Inventing philosophy. Falling into wells. You're not sure cow droids would have helped. Still, curiosity gets the better of both of you. You follow the owl through a narrow pass, over a rocky ridge, and into what looks like an ancient cow corral, except it's empty, or nearly empty. In the center stands a single cow, or rather a sort of cow. It's gleaming, bronze-plated, with wheels instead of hooves. It blinks slowly, then emits a low, sorrowful moo like a lute being sat on. Apollo coughs into his fist. "Well, that answers the question of where my smart herd went." The owl does a celebratory spin. "Unit 001 located. Please initiate reactivation protocol." Before you can stop him, Apollo steps forward and presses a sun-shaped button behind the cow's ear. Immediately, the cow begins to glow. Also, you step back. The air fills with mechanical whirring, distant hoofbeat sounds you think they're pre-recorded, and a faint scent of burnt hay. Apollo, ever proud, leans in. Behold, the future of pastoral life. And then the cow explodes. Not violently, just dramatically. Panels pop open, gears shoot into the bushes, and the cow emits a final, tragic moo before collapsing sideways like a deflated bagpipe. A long silence follows. The owl clicks sadly. "Unit 001 terminated." Apollo nods, stoic. "Well, that went about as well as last time." You dust off your tunic and mutter, "Maybe mortals are better at the cow thing." The rest of the night is quiet. The owl powers down with a final beep. You and Apollo sit beside the smoldering remnants of the world's first robotic cow, watching the stars fade into dawn. There's a weird comfort in the failure. A soft, almost human truth buried beneath all the bronze and bravado. Even gods can't automate everything. The project never made it into the myths. Most scribes skipped it, choosing instead to focus on Apollo's lyre playing or his love life or that one time he tried to start a plague. But here, in this forgotten lab, you witness something better than legend, a god trying and failing to make chores easier. You pat him on the back. He scowls. Don't be sentimental. It was just a cow. Still, as you leave, you notice him glance back. Just once, the busted all creaks in the breeze. Somewhere nearby, a gear finally gives up and rolls downhill with a sound like a contented sigh. By now, you've accepted that Apollo's cow-herding phase involved equal parts ambition, disaster, and unexplained mooing. But just when you think you've seen the weirdest parts of his pastoral resume, he casually mentions, "Oh, I also did a brief stint in cattle divination." You stop walking. "You mean telling the future from cows?" He shrugs. "Not the whole cow. Just the way they chewed." You stare. He elaborates. "The ancients were very into reading signs. Birds, smoke, entrails. I figured cows were underutilized." A pause. "Didn't catch on?" Unsurprising. Still, because you're traveling with Apollo, the god who once tried to invent solar-powered sandals, didn't store well, you now find yourself at an abandoned oracle site nestled in the Arcadian hills. It's overgrown, forgotten, and smells faintly of thyme and whatever herb goats like to nap on. According to Apollo, this was once his experimental bovino-mantic retreat, a place where he'd observe cows for omens. "You can tell a lot from cud rhythm," he says seriously. "But humans lack patience." You can't argue. Watching a cow chew grass for 45 minutes does not scream prophetic insight. Unless you're very bored. Or immortal. Still, the place has charm. The small stone amphitheater is carved with symbols, half constellations, half cows. At the center stands a cracked marble platform with the faint inscription, "He who chews knows." Apollo winces. "Marketing wasn't my strong suit. The ritual," he explains, "was simple: offer barley mash, wait for the sacred cow to choose a direction to face while chewing, and interpret that as a sign from the gods. North meant fortune. South meant caution. East meant romance. West meant goats. Always goats." Historians still argue whether this practice was ever real, or simply a metaphorical interpretation of the horned oracle mentioned in 2 fragmentary scrolls found near Thebes. You now know it was both real and deeply silly. You sit on a mossy bench while Apollo reminisces about his clients. One shepherd apparently received a prophecy that his sheep would fall in love. Turned out to be a metaphor for fleece quality, Apollo mutters. "He still sent me cheese annually." At this point, a very old cow wanders into the clearing. She's plodding, a bit cross-eyed, and emits a phlegmy moo that echoes off the rocks like a tired ghost. Apollo lights up. "Calliope!" You blink. "You named the oracle cow?" She was more consistent than most mortals. Calliope blinks at you. She's missing a horn, possibly gained a few moss colonies, and absolutely radiates the energy of someone who has witnessed too much. Apollo kneels, offers her some barley, and waits. Calliope chews. Slowly, rhythmically, staring directly at you. Apollo beams. "West." You nod. "Let me guess. Goats?" He sighs. "It's always goats." You sit for a while, watching the sun move across the sky. There's something oddly peaceful about being in a forgotten oracle pasture beside a geriatric cow and a disgraced sun god. As the day warms, Apollo sketches a little diagram in the dirt with a stick. It's part cow, part astrological chart, part something he calls ruminant calculus. You're 80% sure it's nonsense. Still, he seems happy. Not heroic happy, not giant python defeated happy. Just quietly content in a way that makes you feel like this was the real one all along. "I tried to teach humans how to listen," he says, eyes softening. "But they were always talking, praying, complaining. No one just listened to the cow." He pats Calliope on her sun-warmed hide. She flicks her tail in response and chews slightly louder, as if delivering a message in Morse code only Apollo can decipher. That night, you camp in the old amphitheater. The stones still hum faintly with decades of misguided prophecy. A soft wind carries the scent of lavender and distant, judgy sheep. Apollo plays a few notes on his lyre. Not a song, just something melodic, simple. Maybe a lullaby. Maybe a thank you. Calliope snores beside you, her breath slow and steady, like a rhythm you didn't know you needed. The stars rise. A fox barks in the distance. You think of all the seekers who once stood here, desperate for answers, watching a cow blink at the horizon. And now you understand the appeal. It's not about the prediction. It's the pause, the quiet, the invitation to sit still long enough to realize that maybe, just maybe, the universe is chewing alongside you. Pasture is somehow even quieter than night. The sky has just started to brighten, painting the horizon with sleepy streaks of gold and violet. Dew clings to the moss-covered stones. Calliope, ever majestic in her bovine ancientness, lumbers toward a sun-dappled patch of grass and resumes chewing without fanfare. No ceremony, no celestial chorus, just the world's most retired prophet doing what she does best. You stretch, unsure whether sleeping on a slab of sacred limestone was good for your back, but you're surprisingly at ease. Beside you, Apollo is already awake, fiddling with what looks like a homemade sundial fashioned from a broken lyre string and 3 goat bones. You're inventing something again, you murmur. Improving, he corrects. It's a directional timepiece. Tells you when and where to nap. So, a compass for laziness? Exactly. He beams. You finally get it. After a simple breakfast of figs, leftover barley mash, and exactly 1 mysteriously warm grape, Apollo announces that it's time to move on. I've heard of a town where the cows paint. We should investigate. You don't ask. At this point, you know better. As you walk, he tells you more about his years as an unofficial cowherd/wandering musician/occasional cartographer. I once tried to map the constellations based on how cows laid in a field, he says. The cow zodiac didn't take off. To your astonishment, he pulls a crumpled piece of parchment from a pocket. It's covered in ink blot-like doodles that vaguely resemble cows arranged in starry patterns. Historians still argue whether this is the origin of the southern herd, he says proudly. You raise an eyebrow. There's no southern herd. There could be, he insists. You arrive at a small village nestled between 2 rolling hills. It's charming in the way forgotten places are quiet, sun-baked, and filled with chickens that refuse to acknowledge traffic laws. Apollo seems to know every cobblestone. This is where I tried the apprenticeship thing, he says, leading you past a well and toward a weathered barn. Inside, the air is thick with hay and nostalgia. The walls are covered in paintings. Not just rustic brushstrokes, but what appears to be genuine artwork created somehow by cattle. Hoofprints in paint. Smears with intention. One piece looks disturbingly like Zeus. A thin, sprightly woman appears from the shadows. Apollo? She says, peering over her spectacles. Back to reclaim your art school? Apollo shrugs sheepishly. Just visiting. Still owe me for the purple dye incident, she says, but her smile is fond. You learn that during one of his more experimental phases, Apollo decided cows might benefit from artistic expression. He set up a barn, some canvases, a lot of berry-based paint, and very few rules. The results were avant-garde. Some of the paintings are still here. One shows a cow licking a canvas into abstract swirls. Another appears to depict a thunderstorm entirely from the perspective of a haystack. There's even a piece called Self-Mutrate. Historians would have a field day here. Some argue that animal-assisted artistry had roots in ancient rituals, others claim Apollo just got bored. Either way, it was a brief but glorious moment in agricultural aestheticism. Apollo gestures toward one large canvas that's been preserved behind glass. This one, he says reverently, was made entirely with tail flicks. It's actually kind of beautiful. Deep streaks of indigo and ochre, layered like wind over a field. You tilt your head, then blink. Did it just wink at you? Probably not. But still, outside, the village is hosting its weekly market. Apollo waves at several vendors. One sells only cheeses shaped like mythological monsters. Try the Cerberus triple cream, he advises. Another offers dried herbs labeled For Good Dreams, Mild Regret, and Sudden Poetry. You buy some of the poetry blend. Can't hurt. As the sun climbs, Apollo tells you about a farmer here named Giannis who once asked for help with a cow that refused to moo. I tried to explain that some cows are just introverted, Apollo says. He didn't believe me, so Apollo sang to it. Not just a casual tune, but a full-on lullaby to coax out its voice. Eventually it mooed in harmony, he says proudly. Still my best duet. You pass the field where it happened. The cow, probably not the same one, is chewing calmly. Apollo sings a single note as you walk by. The cow flicks its tail in rhythm. Coincidence? Maybe. Magic? Probably not. But charming? Absolutely. You end the day by the stream, feet in the cool water. Apollo skips stones expertly, each one landing with a perfect plop that echoes like punctuation in a lazy sentence. There's something restful about not being important, he admits. You glance at him. I was a big deal once, he continues. Golden boy, slayer of beasts, god of the sun and prophecy and honestly too many things. But cows? Cows never asked for perfection. Just grass. Maybe a lullaby. It's the most content you've seen him. The sun dips low, casting long shadows across the field. The cows begin to settle, their shape soft and slow-moving against the darkening green. One low moo rolls across the land like a sigh. You close your eyes, listening. The stars are beginning to wake up. You wake to the gentle sound of a reed flute echoing across the pasture. Not Apollo this time, he's fast asleep, sprawled across a boulder like some kind of sun-drunk cat. The music is coming from a nearby hill where a shepherd boy plays lazily, his sheep wandering wherever they please. One of them is attempting to climb a fig tree. You sit up slowly, brush grass from your tunic and stretch your arms toward the pinkening sky. Morning here feels soft, like the world is wrapped in wool and tea steam. The cows are already stirring. One of them sneezes and startles 3 others into a slow-motion stampede that ends with everyone chewing the same patch of grass. Apollo yawns theatrically, blinking at the sky. You missed sunrise, he says. But it was probably overrated. What's the plan today? You ask, already sensing there is no plan. He scratches his chin. There's a village to the east. They say their cows speak in dreams. Speak in dreams? Only to those who nap near them. Apparently, one cow recited half a lost play of Euripides to a traveler last month. You squint. You believe that? He grins. I want to. So you set off again. The road is narrow, lined with thistles and sleepy olive groves. A donkey follows you for about an hour, then turns around of its own accord like it's seen enough. The terrain becomes hillier, and the sun begins to play its favorite trick, turning everything gold just when you're about to complain. You reach the village just before midday. It's small, mostly whitewashed stone buildings with sky-blue shutters and far too many cats. The cows here roam freely, their bells clinking like offbeat wind chimes. You ask the first villager you see about the dream-speaking cows. She nods solemnly. They're shy, though, she says. You'll need to earn their trust. Or nap a lot. Or both. Apollo takes this as a challenge. He immediately lies down in the grass and closes his eyes. You try to follow his lead but keep peeking one eye open. The cows are just watching. Not menacingly. Just judging your technique. You decide to spend the afternoon exploring instead. The village has a modest temple not to any major god but to the Lady of Forgetfulness, who supposedly helps people lose unhelpful memories. Her statue holds a sponge. You leave an offering of a particularly annoying pebble from your sandal just in case. Back by the cow field, Apollo is still asleep. A cow has settled beside him, snout near his ear. You could swear it's whispering. You blink again. Nothing. But when Apollo wakes, he sits up, dazed and inspired. I just dreamed an entire recipe for honeyed fish wrapped in fig leaves, he mutters. Also, I think one of them told me a knock-knock joke. You're not sure what to say. Over the next few days, you linger in the village. Apollo tries to commune with the cows nightly, while you document strange happenings. One cow who only naps at sunset, another that seems to respond to riddles, a third that keeps nudging you toward the same olive tree every time you pass it. You begin to suspect the olive tree is important. You ask the villagers. They just smile. Historians still argue whether the cows here were part of an old Delphic experiment, one old man says. Something about bovine divination. Didn't catch on? Apollo loves that idea. Imagine it, he says, a herd of priestly cows issuing prophecies. Instead of smoke and riddles, just intense staring and the occasional moo. One night, he decides to test it. He brings his lyre, sets it down in the center of the field, and begins to sing a lullaby he claims was once used in Elysium's rest gardens. The cows listen. Then slowly, deliberately, one of them walks forward, touches the lyre with its nose, and lets out a low, melodic moo. Apollo beams like he's won a prize. I think that means yes, he whispers. To what? To everything. You lie in the grass again, staring at the stars. Somewhere nearby, a cow sighs. I used to think power was the answer, Apollo murmurs. But maybe it's peace. Or naps. Or a perfectly ripe figure. A shooting star streaks across the sky. You close your eyes. In your dream, the cows do speak. In slow, yawning syllables, they recite strange poems about thunderberries and moonlight soup. You wake unsure whether it was real, but you taste honey in your mouth and feel oddly rested. The village farewells you the next day with baskets of fruit, bundles of herbs, and a hoofprint-stamped scroll labeled, "Mostly Accurate Prophecies." Cow edition. Apollo tucks it into his bag. Just in case we need to open a fortune-telling stall later. Where next? You ask. There's a hill, he says, where they say the cows dance when no one's watching. You sigh. Of course there is. The road beckons again, warm, dusty, and full of possibilities. You're not sure what time it is when you reach the hilltop. The sun is somewhere behind the clouds and the sky has taken on that sleepy, pewter color that makes everything feel like it's happening just after lunch or just before a nap. Apollo swears this hill is famous not for any battles or temples or kings, but because, according to scattered rumors and at least one weathered inscription, the cows here have been seen dancing. Naturally, you ask him what kind of dancing. Historians still argue whether it was a circular ritual shuffle or a spontaneous frolic. He replies with a perfectly straight face. Some say they only dance during eclipses. Others claim it happens every Thursday. It's Tuesday. You climb higher. The hill is lush and wide, surrounded by slopes of thyme, mint, and wild marjoram. The air smells like soup and bees. No cows are visible yet, but you can hear the occasional moo somewhere to the left, and then from behind you, you turn around. A lone cow stands on a low stone terrace, slowly lifting one leg and then another. It could be stretching. It could be contemplating something profound. Or it could be mid-routine. There's no way to tell. Apollo drops his pack. We wait, he announces. You spend the rest of the afternoon lounging under a fig tree, playing lazy guessing games. Would Dionysus win a dance battle? Only if his opponent had dignity, and watching the clouds rehearse their big dramatic exit. Eventually, the cows emerge. First 2, then 4, then 7, all moving in that slow, synchronized way that makes you wonder whether they've been practicing behind a barn somewhere. They begin circling the terrace, hooves clicking softly on the ancient stones. Apollo gasps. You blink. It's a dance? Sort of? Imagine a waltz, but performed underwater, and also by creatures who are deeply ambivalent about effort. It's hypnotic, strange, and weirdly beautiful. You half expect someone to start singing, but it's completely silent, save for the faint crunch of hooves and the occasional distant call of a hawk overhead. You begin to feel drowsy, not from boredom, but from something deeper, something oddly serene about this moment. You lie back, letting the scene play across your half-closed eyes like an old film. Apollo leans over and whispers, "Do you feel that?" You nod. You do. It's not magic exactly, just something gentler, like the world itself exhaling. Later, in the village below, an old woman confirms it. The cows only dance when they're content, she says. And when the land remembers. You try to press her for details, but she just waves a hand. Not everything needs explaining. Apollo, of course, immediately tries to explain it anyway. It's probably residual sacred energy from the old sanctuary, he says. This whole region used to be dotted with altars, sun gods, moon gods, seasonal rites. There are layers here. But cows, you say. Even cows, he insists. Especially cows. That night, you camp at the edge of the hill. You roast root vegetables over a low fire and listen to Apollo recount a myth you've never heard before. Something about a demigod who tried to teach fish how to write poetry. It ends poorly for the fish. You both laugh. The stars are out and they seem to lean in a little closer than usual. You hear a bell in the distance, just one soft chime, and then nothing. You fall asleep wondering if the cows will dance again tomorrow. In your dream, they do. This time, they wear flower crowns. You and Apollo wake at the same time the next morning. You both look toward the terrace. Empty. No hoofprints. No music. Nothing but dew on grass and a slight breeze carrying the scent of figs and rain. Apollo shrugs. Maybe it was all a dream. Maybe, you say. Or maybe they just don't dance 2 nights in a row. You gather your things in silence, letting the quiet settle like a blanket. The road waits at the bottom of the hill, twisting lazily toward whatever comes next. Before you leave, you place a pebble on the edge of the terrace. A tiny tribute to a moment you're not sure was real, but definitely mattered. Apollo does the same. You don't speak as you walk down the hill. You just breathe the time-scented air and keep your eyes half-closed, trying to hold onto the echo of hooves. You reach the road. The wind shifts. A faint bell rings behind you. Neither of you turn around. Apollo's pace has slowed. You can tell he's stalling. Not with drama. Just that peculiar sort of ambivalence that happens when someone's nearing the end of a story they're not sure they want to finish. The road now winds into olive groves. The sun has slipped into a kind of gentle resignation, casting long shadows that shimmer and stretch like sleepy cats across the red clay path. Somewhere nearby, a cicada strikes up its scratchy lullaby. Apollo gestures vaguely ahead. There's a spring up there. Used to be sacred to Artemis. I used to sneak there when I was little. Pretend I was her. Steal her thunder. You raise an eyebrow. What? She had good taste in capes. he says deadpan. And excellent aim. The spring is, predictably, modest. A cracked stone basin surrounded by reeds and the bones of old votive offerings, tiny bronze arrows, a rusted brooch, and what appears to be a very determined goat carved from limestone. The water burbles up clear and slow, not rushing, not roaring, just being. You both sit. Apollo doesn't speak for a long time. Then he sighs. I tried, you know. Cowherding. Healing. Music. Prophecy. I even ran a vineyard once. Wait, you ran a vineyard? Briefly, he replies. The grapes unionized. You snort. He stretches out on the grass and stares at the sky. You know what nobody tells you about being a god? It's boring. Immortality just means you have too long to regret everything. You lie beside him. A breeze brushes your face like a whisper. The spring chatters softly to itself, like a friend talking in their sleep. Apollo continues. They think I got fired from the cowherding job. But really? I left. Why? The cows were smarter than me, he says, completely serious. And more content. And don't laugh, they never judged me for crying. You don't laugh. The air smells like rosemary and damp stone. A bird rustles the reeds and then flutters away, leaving only a ripple in the surface of the spring. You trace a finger through the water. It's cold, but not unfriendly. Apollo reaches into his satchel and pulls out a small, tarnished flute. Want to hear something? You nod. He plays. It's not a triumphant tune. No blaring fanfare or triumphant call to war. It's soft, wistful. A lullaby for old regrets and younger selves. Each note seems to fall directly into the soil like seeds or tears or both. You close your eyes. The melody sinks deep. Maybe it was a spring like this where he first played. Maybe that's why Artemis let him near her shrine, because she heard him and understood. Maybe he played for the cows too. The song ends. Apollo shrugs. I used to think being good at everything meant I'd finally matter. Now I think maybe I just wanted someone to sit with me by the water. You sit. The silence that follows isn't awkward, it's sacred. The kind of silence that temples try to mimic with marble and incense, but which comes naturally beside an unremarkable spring on a very average day. You both drink from the basin. The water is mineral-heavy, ancient, and slightly sweet, like rain that's been thinking too much. Then, from behind the trees, a faint jingling. A cowbell. You both sit up, alert. A single cow wanders into view, stares at the two of you, then meanders to the edge of the spring. It drinks, stares again, and plods off. Apollo watches it go. That one's seen things. You agree. You pack up. But before you leave, Apollo does something curious. He takes the flute and places it on the stone rim of the basin. Let someone else find it, he says. Let someone else try. The wind carries the scent of figs again. You glance back at the spring one last time. The flute glints in the sun, waiting. You walk in silence, both of you steeped in whatever that moment was. Nostalgia? Forgiveness? Some flavor of peace? The road is quieter now. Fewer birds, fewer branches to duck under. Just long, warm stretches of path flanked by olive trees like dozing sentinels. Eventually, Apollo says, you know, there's a story I never told you. You glance at him. It's about a farmer who tried to sue a god for bad weather. How'd that go? Well, the god didn't show up to court, he says. Sent a flock of geese instead. They were extremely persuasive. You both dissolve into laughter that trails behind you like smoke. The road turns. And just beyond it, the edge of something new. The path is now silvered with dusk, that particular shade of lavender blue that softens all edges. You and Apollo walk more slowly, not from weariness, exactly, but the sort of quiet that settles in when a story has said nearly all it came to say. Ahead, scattered ruins emerge from the hillside, pillars like fallen chess pieces, olive presses long gone silent, the crumbled footprint of what was once a shrine, or maybe a school, or maybe just someone's very ambitious gazebo. It's hard to say. Apollo gestures vaguely. This was supposed to be my temple. You stop. Supposed to be? He shrugs. Funding fell through. Or maybe I got distracted. Or maybe I just realized I didn't want a temple. Why not? He studies the stone in his sandal. Because people only build temples for gods who've stopped trying. You let that sink in. The ruins are humble. Ivy has crept across most of the foundation and bees hover lazily around a cracked marble altar. Someone's left a half-burnt candle there, an offering, perhaps, or just a forgotten picnic accessory. Apollo picks it up, sniffs it. Jasmine. Classy. You sit on what remains of a column drum, rounded and smoothed by centuries of wind and goats and teenage poets with too much time and too little direction. He sits beside you, knees drawn up. I tried to be everything, he says. God of music. Of healing. Of truth. Of the sun. You left out archery. And that. But the thing no one tells you is that if you say yes to every role, you don't get to stay in any of them. You nod. Mortals do this too, he adds. Switching jobs, reinventing themselves. but you have the comfort of aging out of your bad decisions. You both glance around at the not-quite temple. It's weird, he murmurs, being eternal but unsure where you belong. A gentle wind picks up, stirring the leaves and your hair. Somewhere, a nightingale starts to sing clear and simple. You ask, do you ever wish you were mortal? All the time, he answers without hesitation. But only during thunderstorms, or funerals, or while drinking mediocre wine. You smile. He pauses. Then, and when cows ignore me, a beat, still bitter. He exhales. Still impressed, honestly. The shadows deepen, and the ruins begin to vanish into themselves. You walk through them slowly, touching old stones, feeling the weight and warmth of memory. Not just Apollo's, but the countless others who prayed here, napped here, carved graffiti into here. Do you hear that? Apollo whispers. You pause. At first, it's just wind. Then, a soft, almost inaudible lowing in the distance. Another cow. He grins. They always find me eventually. You shake your head. Maybe you're just better at hurting than you thought. He laughs. Or maybe cows just like sad music. The two of you sit on a ridge overlooking the valley. The last light kisses the horizon, and far off, a shepherd's dog barks once, then settles. Thank you, Apollo says suddenly, for walking with me, for not asking me to turn into a swan or a ray of sunshine or whatever else mortals think we're good for. You tilt your head. You're welcome. For what it's worth, I think you'd have made a great cowherd. He grins, eyes soft. Only if you'd be my assistant. I don't do dung, you reply firmly. Fair, he says, lying back against a slab of stone. You know, cows never care about prophecies, or epithets, or temple dedications. You lie beside him. Maybe that's why they're perfect. The stars start appearing, first a few hesitant ones, then more, until the sky blooms with silver freckles. Apollo hums a tune, something old, slow, maybe even pre-myth. It settles over the landscape like mist. The ruins sleep. The cows somewhere chew thoughtfully. And the god beside you exhales one long, luxurious breath. You don't speak again. Not because there's nothing to say, but because some endings are quiet by nature, like dusk, like sleep, like the last note of a lullaby played for no one in particular, and yet meant for you all the same.